Hey everyone, just wanted to give you a quick heads up. The second Global Product Owner Summit is coming soon. You can get all the details at bit.ly/Product Owner 2024. That's bit.ly/Product Owner 2024. And it's all lowercase, all one word. Oh, and stick with us until the end of the episode to know the dates and the tracks that we have for you in this year's summit. But for now, let's dive into today's episode. Hello, everybody. Welcome to a very special bonus episode where we talk about NoEstimates with product owner Lee Beckett. Hey, Lee, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely. So Lee has over 17 years of experience in digital product development and is a certified product owner and lean practitioner. He's skilled in setting product goals, managing backlogs, and Lee excels in guiding teams through the product lifecycle and fostering a culture of empiricism and learning in agile environments, which is, of course, a very key aspect of NoEstimates in itself. So, Lee, that was a short intro. Tell us a bit more about yourself and how did you come to experiment with NoEstimates?
Well, I've been working as a product owner for about the last 5 years now. Over the course of my career, I've been involved in quite a few different disciplines when it's come to product development. I first started looking, strangely enough, with coding when I first joined Amazon, my very first role. Then I moved into different areas, looking at design, learning more about UX, UI design, and also a lot of work in strategy around product strategy as well. So over that course of that career that I've had, I feel like, I've touched on quite a few different aspects of product development, and that's kind of led me into that product ownership role. How I got started with experimenting with NoEstimates is over the course of a few different roles I've had and a few different projects I've worked on, I noticed a few things when teams have been estimating work. Now, I've always worked with sprint points using the Fibonacci scale. I've not used other estimate techniques before. But I think a key problem that I've noticed over a period of time with that is that it's such a conceptual idea. And it's not really tangible. It's very difficult for people to kind of grasp the concept and how it works and why it's supposed to work. What I'd often find is, and I've often worked with teams that are new to Scrum framework and Agile ways of working. So being part of that leadership of bringing them on board with these practices, whether it's the framework itself, whether it's complementary practices like estimation. And what I'd find is people would agree, okay, yes, we understand what you're asking. And then over a period of time, some weeks or months, someone would say, hang on a second, what is this we're doing? Why do we doing this? How does it work? And I'd always end up second guessing my knowledge about it when I'm asked that question. Well, wait a second, how does this work? Why does it work? Trying to explain through that process with them to try and get them back on board with it. And, often people would say, oh, okay, yeah, I understand. And then a period of time would go past and someone else would kind of raise the question again of, wait, why are we doing this? How does this work? And that's clearly a key problem. If people don't have confidence in the process, then are you getting the best out of people with it? In the current project I'm working in, what I've noticed over a period of time, that eventually when we've been estimating, things just tended to end up being the same size. We were getting really good at breaking down backlog items to the point where unconsciously, I think they just generally ended up being sort of the same size. And then I started questioning, well, if that is the case and everything generally is around the same size, is there any point in continuing going through this process? Is it a waste? Is it time that we could use for other better things? So that's when I started first thinking about there's maybe different ways we can go about this. Now, because of a few ongoing organizational changes we're experiencing in my current role, we haven't had over the last 6 months, regular support of a Scrum Master. That's starting to change again, which is good now. But I ended up myself kind of adopting those accountabilities alongside being a product owner. I know a lot of people will say that it's not really, it's not a great thing that a product owner is also the Scrum Master. It's not really recommended, but that's kind of the situation I found myself in. So that was the opportunity to start making some changes and seeing how they worked.
And I guess we can talk about that now, because I was going to ask you next, can you share a specific example where the NoEstimates approach benefited the project you were in? I don't know if you're going to talk about this or any other project, but let's dive into that.
This is the first role that I've been in, the first project I've worked in where we have largely abandoned estimation. I think it's often considered or misunderstood as being part of the Scrum framework, estimation. And I think that some of that stems from the way Scrum courses are run, where complementary practices are laid side by side with the framework. And even with the best will in the world, a trainer may make it very clear that this is a complementary practice. You can start with this to help you get off the ground, but maybe over time, see if it's working for you, try something else. But in a 2-day course, there's so much information that's involved to take away. I think they just get mashed together and people misunderstand these complementary practices, consider them being part of the framework, or they try them out. They know they're not part of the framework, but they try them out as something to get them up and running. But they don't really review that. They don't come back and ask those questions, and it just becomes part of the process.
A little bit like in a bit of inertia, right? Like we talked about it, so let's just use it.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's really, that's a good word to use, I think. And I think that people often think if they're not doing those practices, they're not doing Scrum correctly, because of whether they've misunderstood or because of that inertia, it's just become a part of their process. And then that's when that dreaded phrase best practice starts coming out, which that's a longer conversation, but it's a phrase that makes me cringe when I hear it. It was really, I was really keen to start trying to move away from some of those things where we had the freedom to do so. I think there's a lot of problems where it's expected that these things are done, whether it's from within the team or whether it's from management or maybe Scrum Masters who, are kind of working with old understanding or kind of maybe stuck in their ways.
I find that there's a lot of people who think that it really just is needed, right? Like they might not even understand why it's needed, or they might actually have an inkling as to why it's needed. And I mean, it's quite easy if we're asked by stakeholders and managers, when will it be done? It's very easy to fall into the trap of, well, let's just estimate it, right? So I think it's quite natural for people to kind of grab on to estimation as a way to answer those questions. How do you see it, Lee?
Yeah, I think so. And I have to be honest, we haven't completely abandoned estimation in our team. We do still sometimes estimate backlog items, and I'll quickly explain that before you kick me off the podcast. We don't tend to estimate for bits of work that may be smaller, enhancements to existing functionality, things where it's very clear what we need to achieve. We don't bother with doing that. But where we may do estimation is those larger bits of work that may be not so tangible. There are a lot of unknowns, but the team have decided that we probably know enough to at least begin this work, and we'll discover as we go, how to resolve that. And that decision on whether to estimate, I leave up to the team. So we'll ask that question: do we feel like we know enough? Should we move on? Do we want to look at effort around this piece of work? And the team will either agree, yeah, no, we know, I think we know everything, let's move on. Or someone will say, yeah, I think looking at effort will be good. And then that's when we do some estimation. So that's driven by the team. And we only really use it as a last step sense check to make sure that we all understand the work in the same way. Whether we understand it correctly or incorrectly is a different point entirely.
And of course, the ultimate validation of what we understand only really happens in practice, right? Because otherwise we would have to have extensive requirements, extensive design, and so on, right? But we don't. Even when we do talk about efforts like you just mentioned, we're not going to stop the conversation and go out and write all the requirements and all of the design specs and then come back and talk about effort, right? We're just going to give it, thumbs in the air kind of number, and that's it.
Yeah, and I think you get to that point when you do have psychological safety within your team, within the environment. I think where there's people who are fearful of being told off for failing something or being considered to fail, or there's not a lot of psychological safety, teams are really worried about starting work without knowing absolutely everything about it. And we're lucky in our team where we're at that point where the team are comfortable to say, yeah, we know enough. Let's to at least start. Let's get going. When we do that estimation, it's just to make sure we're in the same ballpark. If the estimates are generally the same, we'll just move on and we won't ever refer to that estimate again. We don't use it for reporting. We don't use it for forecasting. But if there are big disparities in the estimates, that's just an opportunity for us to have more of a conversation. What do you understand about the work? What do you understand about the work? As long as all the cards are on the table and the team all say, yep, we all understand everything that's been said, we move on. We don't re-estimate. We don't try and make everyone have the same estimate. It's just an option to have another conversation before we consider piece of work ready for us to go ahead with.
If I hear you correctly, I could rephrase what you said by we use this. Somebody that I know would use the term order of magnitude sizing, right? Like we're talking about very high granularity, very coarse granularity numbers, right? You're probably not talking about the exact number of days and hours, but you might be, is it more like 1 sprint or 3 sprints, right?
Yeah, so usually I think when we get to the point where we look at an estimate, we feel we'd have broken the work down enough that it would fit within 1 sprint. When we've got a large epic or feature that may spread over several sprints, we're not ready to start having that discussion yet. So it is, it is comparative estimation based on previous sizing we've done. We don't put too much focus on that. Really, it's a conversation driver. Once we've had that conversation, we move on, and that's kind of where our estimate journey ends.
And that's one of the things that I found interesting in your description is that even though you might have that sizing conversation, your words were, and then we abandon it, right? Like you leave it behind and we don't refer to that anymore. Is it then that, you don't write it anywhere, it's just a conversation, it stays in the ether and it never goes down into reports or documents or anything?
We used to record that within our backlog. So we use Azure DevOps, that we have our backlogs in, our repos, etc. So we used to record that in there. We kind of fallen away from doing that because we don't use those numbers again. Now, when we did do estimation as a bit more of a religious process, I was using that to generate a product burn down chart. What I found is that no one really worried about that. None of our stakeholders really cared about our reporting, because when we started this project, it was really key for me that we were delivering working products after every sprint. Whether or not we achieve that, that's another question. But that was always our commitment. We're going to make sure we slice this work well, that we have end-to-end working functionality. And over the course of the project, we've been able to consistently demonstrate that in our sprint reviews and our conversations with our stakeholders. We're also really transparent about our user interviews and our user testing. We make that available to our stakeholders if they want to dial in, sort of watch from the shadows around the conversations. We record those sessions, so it's always available. We do good summary documents at the end of each round, so all that information is available when we highlight where our assumptions were and weren't validated and how we're going to change our plan based on that. And I think because we do that and we are so transparent with our stakeholders, I think a lot more value is put into that work than it is forecasting in the future, which we make it very clear to our stakeholders as well, is just guesswork and is always going to be shifting and changing if we did spend a lot of our effort trying to do long-term forecasting. So I think we've got a lot of trust from our stakeholders based on that, the delivery we're doing and our transparency. And I think they put a lot more value in that than they would in forecasting. Other projects around us, I think there is a lot more pressure on forecasting. And that's maybe because there is less of transparency and because their delivery hasn't been so focused on working product increments after every sprint, which is what we've been trying to do since day one.
Absolutely. And I think that's a key aspect of obtaining that trust, to be able to be transparent and to deliver working software on a regular basis. Now, regarding your journey with implementing NoEstimates or dropping estimation from one of the regular and frequent practices that you use, what was for you, specifically for you as part of that process, the hardest challenge or frustration?
Well, I mean, I'm probably sounding to a lot of people quite smug when I say that it was actually really easy for us. And that's not going to be the same for every team. Depends on the environment you're working in. But I think the hardest challenge for us, if you could call it a challenge, was just moving away from what people expect to see. It's really easy for people to ask or demand that something be done, particularly when it's something like estimation. But it's a lot harder to justify why you want it done. I think, as I said, a lot of that does stem from maybe the way Scrum courses are sometimes run, and people expect it to be done because it's supposed to be part of the framework, except it's not. I think some of the challenge has been, I think some of the challenge we would have faced would have been if we tried to bring about this change before we'd established that trust with our stakeholders and our continual delivery. I think over a period of time, because we've got that trust, because we've been showing that consistently for a year now, maybe even more, and we're constantly open about where we're succeeding, where we're failing, promoting our failures as opportunities to learn, celebrating those failures and making sure that we can show that we're looking to pivot and change our plans based on those continual learnings. It's given us that opportunity to make that change and have that change have a very little impact really on our working day-to-day practices. It's helped the team because we're stepping away from confusing, complicated practices. It's less time we're spent worrying about. It depends how you do estimation, I guess, but I've worked in teams where it's been imperative to the person facilitating, the Scrum Master, that everyone ends up with the exact same estimate. And if you don't, you continue discussing and you go away, have more discussions until everyone says, yes, 5 points. The problem with that, when people don't see value in it, they'll just say 5 points anyway. And I've seen that where a group of people will vote, someone has an outlying estimate, and even without a conversation, they just say, oh yeah, I'll change mine, I'll agree with everyone else. Because people generally don't want to do that, particularly when they don't really understand the practice as much as maybe they need to. So it was really easy for us to kind of move away from that and do it without big announcement, just stop asking about it and see what happens.
Mm-hmm. And I imagine that when we think about change right? So because introducing these ideas is a little bit of a change as well. I imagine that this effort you had made of delivering often and being transparent about the good and the not so good things with stakeholders, that kind of made it easier to move on and not get bothered by others about it. Was there something other than that? So showing the transparency, delivering working software on a regular basis. Was there something other that you think was really helpful and contributed to getting those ideas implemented in the team, and of course also in the communication with stakeholders?
I think I've always been very clear and transparent when it comes to forecasting, that this is based on what we know right now, and what we know in half an hour from now may be completely different. So what we're looking at, if we're looking at some form of burn down chart, this is all subject to change at any point. I've worked in teams where a burn down chart, a non-linear line on a burn down chart, has been seen as some sort of failure. And we can't have that. It must be a perfectly linear line burning down. Where, when we have done burn down charts, I love a non-linear line, because it proves that the team are learning and changing what they're doing based on what they're learning at any point. When we plan our sprints, they're not fixed. They're constantly changing. We're bringing things in, we're dropping things out as we learn, as we go. I think when you see the value in those conversations, those plan changes, it really does highlight that those estimates, those forecasting, doesn't really have much value beyond the next 5 minutes. And
especially if you expect the content of the backlog to change during the sprint, because you might expand on something that was already there, or something else might come in.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have been asked to provide some forecasting, some high level forecasting, really not beyond, can you just give us a date? And whenever I've been asked of that by management, they always end that with, I know it's going to change. I know it's not fixed. It's going to be different at some point. Can you just tell us a date now? And I kind of think to myself, well, why are you asking then if you know it's going to change? But, I can't fight every battle. So I say, yeah, finger in the air, mid-March, and give them something to go away and have a chat about. But, each time we're doing our sprint reviews, making it very clear that, our plans changed. What do you think about our new plan? What do you think is valuable to you right now? Then let's reorganize that backlog based on that information, and let's move forward. So there's the opportunity for management themselves to, or our stakeholders themselves, to affect our plan and tell us exactly what's valuable to them on a 2 weekly basis, as our sprint cadence is.
So that conversation about give us a date is also interesting for the next question, because one of the questions that I had here was, how have you changed the way you plan and prioritize, given that you are no longer estimating all of the items, even if you are some of the items. And of course, that is also influenced by the stakeholder interface, because they are going to want you to prioritize some things rather than others. So how do you have those conversations with stakeholders, and how do you in the team now plan and prioritize the work, given that you're not assigning sizes to all of the items?
Yeah, so I think, well, just because we're not doing estimate as a habitual practice, it doesn't mean that we don't have a general idea of what the effort that might be involved in work. We're constantly talking about this work. We go through rounds of refinement with each piece of work. We break it down, and as I said before, we've found we're generally breaking bits of work down to kind of the same size, really. So we do find it easier to Let me rephrase that, I think. But yeah, because instead of we're not talking about numbers constantly, we're talking about the actual work involved, the value we want to deliver, and we plan our work based on those discussions rather than an arbitrary number that we've assigned something, which would be completely different if some other team were speaking about the work. In terms of planning our sprints, I think we've got very good at discussing and setting ourselves sprint goals that we feel are achievable but challenging. And I think that's really something important for us, that we toe that line where we're being as effective and innovative as possible, where we're not constantly failing to meet our commitments, but we're not just easily jogging towards that sprint goal. And it helps with the team where over time they've got very good at saying, right, well, we know enough to just get started, and we'll find more about the work as we work on it. Our sprint reviews are really important to us. And as I said, trying to be as transparent as possible with our stakeholders, give them as much information as we have available to us, and then make sure we are looking at that sprint back, looking at our product backlog within those review sessions, so they're completely understand about where we're at currently, where we feel maybe the next things are coming up, the next important things for us to look at are coming, and how they might be able to affect that. So yeah, I think when it comes to planning and prioritizing, it's those, again, conversations that are really important, and the transparency we have is really important. And I think what we used to do when we were estimating and we were looking at historical performance, average, we were completing, who knows, 20 sprint points a sprint or something like that, just a number I've pulled out of the air. And then we were planning to that number. We were holding ourselves back from improving because we were basing our future performance on previous performance, where the team's growing, getting better all the time, working better as a team constantly. You would hope to expect some more effectiveness and better performance. So when you're planning like that, you really are just holding the team back and doing yourselves a disservice. Also, when you're planning in that way, really you're just packing a sprint out with enough work that adds up to a certain number. You want to be bringing in work that obviously affects your sprint goal or helps you. At that point, you feel like it's going to help you achieve your sprint goal. But then you're also perhaps bringing in a load of other stuff just to pack your sprint out. And there, you can often see, I've certainly seen in the past, is that you end up with a couple of people working on your sprint goal, a couple of people working on some other stuff that isn't quite connected to that sprint goal. It's just stuff that's in the backlog. And then you haven't got a team that's working together on one particular goal. Everyone's just spread out. What we do now is the same way we know enough to start a piece of work, we bring in enough work to start a sprint, and we don't spend time trying to pack out a sprint's worth of work in one planning session. We bring in the work we think is going to help us with our sprint goal. Anything else we know is imperative for that sprint, we need to get done. And then we get cracking. And if there's capacity during that sprint, which sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't, we'll pull in other work from the backlog when that capacity.
And that's one of the things that I think you said it beautifully. There's always space for more if there's space for more. Right? Like trying to, as you said, pack the sprint with as much work as possible that fits a certain number can be either too easy or too difficult. But if we just do what's necessary for the sprint goal, we can then necessarily, or not necessarily, but we can then adapt. And if we reached our sprint goal, then we have more space, we have more capacity to either work on something that was in the backlog and we wanted to get to, or fix some bugs that are there lingering and nagging, or work on technical debt, whatever there is, right? Like we don't stop being a team just because we've reached the sprint goal.
Absolutely. And I think to have that work, you do need a dedicated and motivated team. And to be able to achieve that, I think sometimes there is a fear that if teams aren't given full work that's going to fulfill the next 2 weeks, then maybe people are going to be resting on their laurels. They're going to be kicking around, not really doing anything. And that's just a lack of trust there. And if you've got a motivated team, because the environment motivates them, the work motivates them, they have a lot of involvement in decision-making, planning. They feel like they're part of the product itself. Then you do have a motivated team that are going to focus on that sprint goal and then say, right, we have more capacity. What else can we do to improve things? And that's really important, to have that motivation in the team.
Absolutely. And the sprint goal can be a great tool to use in that mix of getting the team to be motivated. Now, Lee, looking back, what advice would you give to teams that are perhaps at this moment considering trying out or switching to NoEstimates?
I feel like I'm repeating myself a little bit with each one of these questions, but I certainly would say the first thing to do is to get your house in order, to make sure that you have that open communication, you are being transparent with your stakeholders, you are having your sprint reviews, you're not using them just as a demo of work, but you're having open conversations with your stakeholders in those sessions to work out exactly what is perhaps the most valuable thing to be moving on to next. To make sure that you're having your refinement sessions and the team work well within those refinement sessions. And that you're providing people with enough information through delivery, transparency, and the opportunities to input, and they can see your practices of learning and adapting your plan as you go. And if you have those things in order, I think that's when you can start looking to move away from this. As I said before, if you try and do that, move away from estimates, and you don't have those things in place, that's going to cause some friction, because people need to see or have a sense of progress and where success is coming from. Even if it's some pretty colors on a Gantt chart, if they can't see real progress in terms of product, they're going to fall back on things like Gantt charts. That's when you start, I think, probably start seeing rollback to those old project management ideals of on time, on budget, in scope, because they can't see the actual real valuable work that's happening through the changing plan as you go, and the constant delivery of working product.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a very key point. Like we can't take ownership of our process if the people around us don't trust us, right? Like we really need to work hard at that. And of course, that can be done in many ways. And I think you've shared some very, I think, very good and valuable ways to do that regarding or especially the frequent delivery of working product and transparency, which are key to any great high performing team. Now, Lee, we're getting close to the end, but there's one last question. What is one resource, a source of information, inspiration, or examples that you would recommend our listeners go to when they start their journey with NoEstimates?
So I'm a really big fan of the Agile for Humans YouTube channel and podcast. They champion, maybe a little facetiously, the story points are trash way of thinking, and I think they've got T-shirts with that on and stuff like that. So they talk a lot about story points, and maybe a little bit more dismissively, which if you're looking to transition away from them, using estimates or story points, maybe that's not such a helpful position to try and learn from. But they do have a really interesting discussion on their YouTube channel or their podcast with Ryan Ripley from that that channel, and Josh Anderson from the Metacast podcast, which I have to admit is a podcast I don't listen to. But they have a really interesting discussion on their channel around using estimation, particularly story points, and discussing a middle ground, the kind of how we've been doing around they may not be valuable for certain aspects of reporting, but they can still be valuable to the team. And here are some of the ways that you might be able to utilize them. And I took a lot of learning from that discussion when I was thinking about making some changes within our team, and where I've discussed about using estimation where we feel like there may be opportunity for more discussion to make sure that all our cards are on the table, everyone kind of understands the work as it stands in the same way. And some of that process came from that discussion. So if people are able to, I think it's a really, really interesting discussion to have a listen to.
Absolutely. And we'll put the link to that episode on the show notes. And how about you, Lee? Where can people go to find out more about you and the work that you're doing?
So I'm not a great social media presence, unfortunately, but I am on LinkedIn. That's probably the best place to learn anything about me. I probably don't spend enough time promoting myself on there, and it's something I really should start trying to do. I currently work for SSE, which is a business energy supplier within the UK. And I'm working on a lot of customer-facing product, and my team as well, a lot of customer-facing product for that business. So if you go to the SSE website, you'll see some of the initial work that our team did on our first step towards a new digital platform, and that's constantly ongoing, and we're looking some changes there as well. There's some useful tools on there as well for businesses who are looking for their energy solutions. We have a pricing and contract tool on the platform, which our team has worked on developing as well. And if you're a business looking for business energy, get involved in SSC, and you'll probably see a lot more of the work that my team's been doing.
Absolutely. We'll put the link to that also on the show notes so that people can go first talk with Lee on LinkedIn. Why not? Ask a few follow-up questions and then check out SSE website. Lee, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for your generosity with your time and your knowledge.
Oh, thank you very much for having me on my very first podcast. It was a bit nerve-wracking, but I'm glad I saw it through to the end. So thank you very much.
And you did great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi there, Agile friends. Thank you for sticking around and listening to the details of the Product Owner Summit, this year's global summit dedicated to a critical Scrum role, the Product Owner role, of course. We'll have some amazing keynotes and 4 tracks filled with first-hand stories and experiences for product owners to learn more about that critical Scrum role. The summit will take place between April 23rd and 25th, so book your calendars. There will be loads of sessions for you to attend. One of the keynotes will be Dave West, the product owner and CEO at Scrum.org, one of the largest Scrum organizations in the world. If you want to know more, check out the details at bit.ly/product owner 2024. That's all one word, all lowercase, bit.ly/product owner 2024. We will also have 4 tracks. The 4 tracks will cover cross-functional product ownership. That's track 1. As Pixar's Ratatouille said, not every idea can be a great idea, but a great idea can come from anywhere. And this quote emphasizes the importance of a product owner being open to all ideas, regardless of the source, and also challenges us to focus on getting good ideas from everywhere and involving the whole team in the product owner role and responsibilities. The second track is Designing Products for Growth, where we explore how to craft products ready for scalable growth. merging practical strategies with innovation. The idea here is to learn to design products for growth, whether it is sales or customer acquisition. The third track is Know Your Users, user-centric approaches for Agile development. In this track, we learn to master user-centric techniques in Agile development, to deeply understand customer needs and transform insights into meaningful UX designs that focus on engagement and satisfaction. This is a track ideal for innovation-focused Agile teams. And the fourth track, one of the most exciting tracks in my opinion, is product development with AI, ideas for product owners. Not only do we discuss about using AI in the products, but also AI for product owners to learn to make a bigger impact with the help of the AI tools that we already have. The Product Owner Summit will also present to you great opportunities to network with your peers. So get your ticket and join our Slack. You can get the ticket and join the Slack at bit.ly/Product Owner 2024. As always, we have free tickets and also the paid tickets that help to support this podcast. So check them out at bit.ly/Product Owner 2024. That's all lowercase, all one word, Product Owner 2024. I'll see you in the summit floor.